Very informal, but we're thrilled to have Dr. John Oliffe presenting this workshop today, in part because he has a bit of a reputation in the school as being quite prolific and loving shutting himself away and writing papers. So we're hoping he can give us some of his tips and approaches to academic publishing. Without further ado.
Thanks, Melanie. So thanks for the opportunity to be here. It's always helpful if I know, where you're at in terms of, what you might be hoping from today. So what we'll do is you'll say your name, you'll say what you're working on at the moment, and then you'll finish this sentence. I like to write because. So let's start with you.
Yes. I'm Andy. I'm a postdoc here with Annette and then Brown and Cody Barco. And I'm very lucky to have also an assistant professor position waiting for me at the University of Montreal.
Oh, wow.
So I like to write and I like to write both in French and English. It's easier in French for me now. But I like to write because I like to build an argument and share it. And I would also like to receive feedback about it, but it's not really often.
Okay. And you're doing a PhD?
Sorry?
PhD? Are you in the PhD program?
Postdoc.
Postdoc. Oh, you're a postdoc? Yeah. Oh, okay. Wow. That's great, eh? So when do you start at U of M or in Montreal?
So I'm here for 2 years, and it's been almost a year now.
Okay.
So I'm going back on September 2017.
Wow. That's great. Congratulations. That's terrific news. Hi.
I'm Lori Witter. I'm actually in the manuscript program. I'll be graduating in May. I think you're working with a couple of one of my colleagues.
Yes.
Carrie Lee.
That's right.
I'm actually hoping, I have 2 papers that I was encouraged to publish through the first part of the manuscript program. One of them is my final project, which is also with Empirical. So I was hoping, they've encouraged me to come to this session, so I'm very much looking forward to it. I like to write because I actually really love to read. I'm kind of the same. I enjoy sort of trying to come up with an argument and making a case for something.
Great. Terrific. Welcome. Hi.
I'm from Saudi Arabia. I'm doing my PhD in nursing. This is my second term. And I like to write because I want to share my ideas and get feedback from people out there.
Great. And who's looking after you, supervision? JB. Very good. Terrific.
I'm Christine. I'm also now in the second semester of the PhD program. Dr. Wendy Hall is my supervisor. And I like to write because it helps me to figure out the topic. I mean, I learn from having to write, explain something.
Great. Okay. And we can't poll the people online, can we?
We can actually. If people online want to just quickly write in a little blurb about who they are and why they like to write. It looks like we've got in the chat box, if you want to just add in your perspective. We've got Sandra D'Souza, Sarah Levine, Sherry. I think we have Lillian Hung on line 2. So if you want to just add in your little note.
Or maybe people can add it in as we go.
Sure, I'll monitor the chat. So if people want to add that in, then I'll verbalize it for you Perfect. At the live session.
Yeah, so you folks who are online, by all means, don't hesitate to finish that sentence. I like to write because. Hi, how are you doing?
I'm sorry.
That's all right. We just did introductions, and in order to be admitted into this class of an hour, you have to finish this sentence. And in terms of equity, I'm compelled to ask you to finish it because everyone else has.
Okay, hi, buddy. Academic writing?
Yeah.
I like to write because it really makes me think about what I believe in and what I'm trying to share and say
Right.
in a very particular way.
And you postdoc or PhD or
Postdoc.
who are you with?
I was with Annette Brown, my doctorate, and now I'm with the National Collaboration Center for Aboriginal Health.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good for you. Welcome.
Thanks.
Okay, so yeah, I really like that you all like to write because I reckon that's the first thing. Whenever anyone comes to me and asks about, whether I might be able to supervise or help out, I ask them, do you like to write? Because if you don't, I couldn't imagine doing this job. If you don't, it'd just be a slog, and it's a long enough slog anyway. So the idea that people like to write is very encouraging to me.
So we have one comment from online, and it's Sherry. She finished her PhD last summer and is currently teaching at Vancouver Community College. She likes to write, to share, explore ideas, and get feedback.
Perfect. Yeah. I think too. So some of the things that you say about liking to write, and in that little comment there, we analyse when we write. So much of my people often talk about data analysis as being separate, but I actually analyse data as I write, and when I get good at it, then it comes through in the writing. So my analysis is right. So I agree with you. That's some of the reasons. So back in 2004, I came to this very session. They had it, and it was kind of interesting. I was one of, I think, 2 faculty that showed up, and everyone else was students. And so I had these 3 people who kind of who helped me out. Is it
Just the arrow, not the X, the arrow, yeah.
Joy Johnson, Pam Ratner and Joan Batorf. Now, they're all gone now from here, so they've moved on and up. But they ran this very session. So I have to give a nod to them because I've stolen their content, because it was an hour that I never, ever forgot. I would actually, looking back, it was the best hour I spent in terms of just understanding some of the things that might help me kind of push on a little bit. Because at this point, when I showed up, I had just finished my PhD, and I was pretty rough around the edges, and they were sort of encouraging me to do a postdoc, but I was also, my tenure track clock was ticking. So I was sort of in a faculty position. So I was very buoyed by their mentorship, but also their words of wisdom. So I'm going to steal a couple of their lines today, just in case they're listening. I thought I'd just, let you guys know that it's not my original thoughts, but it's really helped. One of the things that we do when we get a grant these days, but I did exactly the same with my PhD, is that I mapped the papers. So when you ask a research question, you know that there's going to be an answer to that question, and you know that there's a paper in every one of those research questions. And in fact, I remember my PhD was 5 research questions, and so I had 5 papers. I knew there was 5 papers there. And this is a grant out of 2008 it was, and it was just a little grant for the first men's and boys' health call, And when the money dropped, when we got the grant, and we only just snuck in, we were very lucky to get the grant, this was the first thing I did, was write up the papers, because I knew what they would be, I knew where they would be, because I was asking questions that I knew could get answered. So we listed them, and I had these lofty ideas about publishing 8 papers from this 1-year grant, and we only got as deep as 5. But we got them all in, so we published the 5, and the good articles. And then the problem with 6, 7 and 8 was not that they couldn't be written, but was that because it was a 1-year grant, I had to go back and write another grant. And it's quite cyclic. So I believe every time you write a grant, you give up 3 papers. And that's the 3 we gave up to write the next grant. So the cyclic nature of it is interesting to me. So oftentimes I trade off the idea, and this especially going into a tenure track position, you'll trade off all the time. So when you've got PhDs or your postdocs and you've got empirical product there and you kind of know that the papers are there, listing them and putting a little bit of a timeline on them, it can be really, really helpful. So, the same if you've got a couple of papers that you're thinking are kind of there, half there, to list them is a great idea, and then just try and work towards a timeline with them. So we can see the papers the minute we know we've got the money to do the work. We kind of know where the papers are going to be. So, and I think PhDs and masters are the same. And MP programs with that final project, we've published a couple. They're great little papers, just terrific papers. So good stuff. So starting point, I think there's 3 types of papers, and I might be wrong, but for me, there's empirical papers, there's theory papers, and then there's methods papers. And every project, I would argue, should be able to produce something that says something to one of those things. So the empirical papers are the findings, and I believe they're the ones that you want to cut off first. So the minute you've got data in, you want to get an empirical paper out. And so the more times I go into the empirical data, the better my analysis gets. So we published 5 papers from the same data set there, but they all address different questions. But our analysis got better and better as the time went on. And then theory-wise, you might lay a different theory, especially in qualitative work, you lay a different theory onto the papers. And it might be that you weren't thinking that you'd do gender when you posed the question, or you didn't think about Bordeaux, or you didn't think about place, or you didn't think about socioeconomic status when you posed the question, but the data's in, and then you start to see some things in the data. It is okay to iteratively come into the data and go, oh, there's a question I didn't ask of it, but it's answering that question. And so sometimes a theory paper can emerge that you weren't even anticipating would come up. And methods-wise as well, I think a lot of times we do methods and we're learning the formula and we'll apply it, but I think people new to methods often have a lot of really keen insights. And so if you write those papers when you're new to it, I think they can be great papers. So something about what you saw in the methods or what worked in the methods, I think can be really, really key, because as you go on, if you continue on in kind of research, you get less and less attuned to methods. You kind of find your way and you just take it, you kind of just work with what's there. But I think when you're new to it, you have some really important things to say. So just, depending on where you're at, I think there's lots of opportunity for empirical theory and methods. Empirical takes over all my time now because we've got a lot of data in. But say I don't write another grant, or we don't have another grant, then I would start to write more and more methods papers and more theory papers as I, bled the empirical. So I don't read a lot. I'm not a very good reader. I write more than I read. U2, the band, they were never taught their instruments. And so I'm better not reading because I might steal ideas, right? So I'm better to just get the bee's knees, like notes, and just work my way through. But when I do read, I read in particular journals a lot of times. And so I tend to want to publish in the journals that I read, because if that work is speaking to me, then I feel like it could be a good home for my work. So that's often how I pick them. But folks are different. So the impact factor of a journal, for most of us in the social sciences, it's like a good day is anywhere above 1, and usually between 1 and 5 is absolutely great, We rarely ever hit double figures in terms of impact factor. And impact factor really talks about the reach of that journal And the impact factor of the journal does, in many ways, talks to the H index. So the H index is how many times your article gets cited by other people in like a 5-year period. And so my experience is the ones that are well patronised, big readership, translates to a better H index on papers. So I've written a few papers that I think are good, no one ever reads them. You know, maybe they weren't that good, or maybe it was the distribution point. And some of the ones that were in high impact journals, they sit at the top of my list because I think people can get to them easily, and they're known. So it's just one of the things to think about, and it's nice to write things not for your H index or for your career necessarily, but it's great to write them in the hope that people will read them. So if it's a place where more people go, then it kind of makes sense that, you might try and aim high, so to speak, and then work your way down if you don't get lucky on the first, second or third shot. Ooh. Oh yeah, decide your timeline. So I self-impose deadlines. So I've just been on one for 3 months, and it's taken me a long time with this one because I kind of had to start I actually started with a blank page for the first time in a while, and so I was working through. And my goal was to get it out to the co-authors by Easter. And so I got it out yesterday, and it's pretty close, right? Like it's all right. And then I'll invite them into it. But my deadline was imposed not to submit that article, but was to bring people into that article, to have a full first draft that they could kind of engage with, that would be readable, they might enjoy it, and that they might add to in a meaningful way. So anytime you're writing, the lag can be something you want to think about. The lag is increasingly long. In a lot of journals, it's quite long. So anything that I want to publish for 2017 and 18 at the moment, I'd have to get in the next quarter. So the one that I've just sent out to co-authors, I've asked them for a 2-week turnaround. So come end of April, that thing should go in. And if we get lucky on the first round and get revisions invited, the chances are it'll see the light of day somewhere in the back half of 2017. So when you're thinking about when these things actually will be inked officially and published, there's a lag. So I've got another paper that's probably about 30% there, and that I'm actually writing that one now for 2019. Because there's a lag. The good thing with some of the journals, and when you're looking at journals, they have Impress or online first, and that can give a paper extra bit of life. So one of the considerations too that I kind of follow is if they do have that online first, then at least the thing's sitting available for a year before it officially gets into the 2018 or 19 count. So just things to think about. There are some journals too that have massively quick turnarounds, and if you can kind of see with their online piece, online or early view, if their list is very small, you know that you could be published within the year. So there's some journals where you can get in quick. So if you're wanting to do something quickly in terms of turnaround, there are some opportunities out there. But most of the well-established journals, the year in my experience is 12 months at best, and certainly more like 18 months from the point you submit, do your revisions, and then the thing, kind of officially gets marked. I often talk to people about the permission to write. So you have to, I believe that you have to have everything else off. I can't do it and something else, and I can only do one at a time. So giving yourself the permission to focus on one thing, I reckon is increasingly a challenge. I had a bit of an addiction to my iPhone, so I'd be looking at my iPhone overnight instead of reading, drafts of papers. So, so it's about turning other things off increasingly, for me anyway. So that permission to write. So I often will read my draft and I'll be writing to the draft, and I'm actually writing, to that draft. So an environment, I used to have these lofty ideas about being able to get on a long haul and write in a paper, on my way back to Oz, the 15-hour flight, and now I just sleep. And I think I always did just sleep, but I had these really lofty ideas that I was going to somehow crack out this great paper on my 15 hours with Air Canada. My experience is that just doesn't happen. And so environment's really interesting. I can't work with noise, and I can't work with the email on, and I really have to be deep down in it. And if I do have background noise, then I have to have I put the headphones on, I have music, but I can't have lyric. So I can just only have a bit of kind of lounge music at the back, instrumental. So anyhow, I just think they're fundamental things, but we forget them sometimes, So I'm constantly reminded of it, and more so now than ever with all the gadgetry, with the iPhones and everything else, and the tablets and stuff. I have to turn that off to get this stuff done. So it's interesting when we often write in teams, and this brings up issues around authorship, and these are increasingly important things to talk about up front. So if you're a student and you've got a committee and you've signed off on the idea that you'll lead that paper, and the data, if you don't publish from it, they can publish from it in 12 months, those contracts are binding, there's an ethic and an etiquette in the writing. So we tend to be pretty generous, at least in my lab. I think we're very generous in terms of authorship. So we will often bring in a couple of people who might be working with us to have an opportunity to author. If it's graduate students, expectation is that they would be at the front of the authorship, that they would write, they would lead the writing, and then you would insert and help them develop the draft. So I think it's really important to just have those chats about, what constitutes authorship, what's important, how we gauge it, that we might hope to include you as an author, but it'll still be incumbent on what you bring, what you produce in relation to the paper. Writing a paper, in my experience, is different to editing it. So when people co-author, I really like them to bring something conceptually, and vice versa. When I get a paper that's pretty close, and people say to me, can you add into this, can you read it, let me know. My first pass of the paper is usually mechanistic, so I usually just do the editorial, and then I need to look at it the next round to really have a conceptual idea about what I can offer. So it's kind of interesting. So sometimes I think it's good to be really clear about what you want from people in the co-authorship. So the one I've just sent out, it's 37 words over the 8,000 word limit. So I needed people to be able to look for cuts. So that's the editorial part of it. But I also was interested, my bookends weren't quite sitting still. So I had the findings nice, but my front end and my back end weren't quite talking to each other. I could feel it, but I couldn't fix it. So that was the kind of the brief for them, was to say, I just feel like it's a little bit discordant front and back end. Can you help me tidy this one? So again, based on their contributions, then they'll be included in the authorship list. But I was quite explicit about what I needed to help us bring this one home. So I encourage you to have those conversations and understand those conversations as a process. They change. So you want to revisit the conversation a few times. I've learned over the years to never promise authorship, but to just kind of be of a place where you're hoping to include someone, but it's still contingent on what they bring.
Another question from the online audience, and it's, do you have any thoughts about writing in context of participatory action research with community partners that are practitioners with or lived experience and not having a background in writing?
Yeah, very interesting. So we've just, with a postdoc working with Jen Creighton, we've just finished one that does include a community partner, and she's involved in the feasibility of the work that informed the paper. So it's an empirical paper, and so then she brought some feedback to the paper as well, and it's not easy to do, but it's a great thing to do if you can. So I do some work up in Prince George, and we've got a lot of people up in Prince George they've been very, very good clinicians over a very long period of time, and now we've done some work together, and we've got these empirical products, and we're churning out the papers because it's an academic team, clinical team, and we're all on those papers. And it's actually really good because they're learning a ton, we're really enjoying it, and they pull us up on the applied nature of things, which is, I think it works both ways. It's been really good. So absolutely, if you can do it, I hope it answers the question. If you can do it, absolutely, it's a great thing to be able to do. I also I'll include people so sometimes there'll be a big name in the field, who I've always liked and thought would be great to know or write with, and I'll cold call them to see if they'd like to write something with me and send them a draft, and if they say yes, and just to try and advance my thinking as well. So I guess, you can afford to have some people that you're helping up, but hand up, for people that can bring your game up is always something as well to kind of look at with that. So the work of it, this is a term paper. This is really the steps on a term paper. I couldn't write anything in 13 weeks, so I'm very lucky I don't do coursework, and have to produce something in that period of time. But the steps are, pretty much the same. You usually have an idea, you jot those ideas down, you kind of do the analysis, you kind of work with the data, you tidy it up so it's readable and it conveys some sort of spirit or essence of what you're doing to other people. And then it's edit upon edit, but I actually think it's kind of draft upon draft as well. So the process of it is, in my experience, it's formula, it's totally formula. Some of the things, though, are kind of interesting within that formula. So, the order of things. So oftentimes I write the abstract last because I don't know. I can't write the discussion before I've written the findings. And the last one that I've just finished, it was hard because I wrote the findings, but I had no bookends. So I didn't have a literature because it didn't come from a grant that had done an exhaustive piece of the literature. So the context kind of varies a bit too. And so I don't code the entire data for anything. I code it for a paper. So even when staff might code for everything, I might look at a couple of those codes, but usually I go back to the transcripts. I know what's kind of there. I've got an idea about what we can write about, and I'll just code for 3 or 4 things, because a code is a theme, and sometimes a code is 3 themes, and a paper is 3 themes. So I don't code exhaustively because I actually think coding, nice big elaborate coding, in qualitative data at least, you can end up doing that instead of the analysis, just chunking it out. So I don't get caught in, that. I don't know in vivo very well. I've got a real working knowledge of it, but I spend my time with the data. I don't spend my time with the software. So just little things to think about. The word limit and this sort of sectioned allocation. So again, this paper is 8,000 words, so I knew each theme was 1,500 words, so 3 at 15 is 45. The front end's 1,000, probably less, probably want to get in and out for the background in 800. Your methods typically 1,000. So then you've got a couple of thousand, or 1,500 to move out with the discussion and conclusion. So I put those trainer wheels on every section when I'm starting.
Could you just review that again? How does it
Sure.
work out?
Yeah, on an 8,000 word paper, 3 themes at 1,500 words a theme, so that's 45. 800 for your background literature. You're probably 1,000 for your methods, and then you're probably around 1,500 for discussion and conclusion, and your references will take up the rest if it's all in. Yeah. So I write to that, and so when my themes are kind of, when one theme's too fat, then I'll trim down to get to that 1,500, and then I'll look for bleed across the themes. So, just to try and write to the word limits is really good. And your methods, you should be able to write your methods while you're doing data collection, because all you're going to do is pin in your demographics, but you should know kind of your methods for that. So, that's often the first thing that we'll write. Will be the methods. I haven't met anyone yet who cracks out a first great draft and it's just ready to go. And I've written with a lot of folks, and for me it's always been a bit of a slog, but I've enjoyed it, right? So it's about enjoying it. So I always say it's draft upon draft upon draft upon draft. And so, but there are some things that I know about myself. I'm better in the mornings, much better in the mornings, and I can get in the zone really, really quickly and really easily in the morning. So I just have to turn everything else off. So I try to, in my Outlook, I try to siphon off a couple of hours or a half day or even a day to just try and get that session in. Because it's a bit like training. You get better and quicker as you're exposed to it more. I tend to do this section by section. So I wrote one theme, then I sort of fiddled with the methods because it was kind of written. Then I wrote the next theme. Then I wrote the next theme. I was at 3 at 1,500. So I don't try and do all 3. I just do one at a time, and just that's what works for me. I've seen some people so gifted they can literally do it as an integrated kind of thing. So they can be writing the findings and suddenly these 3 labels come out at the end and they just kind of impose them over the top of data. Not so for me, but some people do that way. We talked a little bit about the background noise. Email is the biggest background noise I have. So if I see that thing that little note come up on the bottom of that, then I'm going to look and my head's going to be somewhere else. So it's off. So I turn it off, and then I can just look at the one screen and work to it. Just little things, and increasingly we're in a building that's kind of a construction zone, and so I sort of do a bit more kind of instrumental music now to try and drown some of that out. Also, when I feel like I'm getting somewhere with the draft, I'll bring out a hard copy. I'll print off a hard copy. It's amazing to me even now what changes between the screen and the hard copy. Because and it might just be my generation on that, but anyhow, I read them and I go, oh, really? Like I've looked at it 15 times on screen and I've missed that. So there's something about the touch and the feel, and this sounds a bit cheesy, but the touch and the feel of the paper, and then also the aesthetics of the paper. So when I look at it, and some of these papers, they breathe because they're double spaced, they've got nice columns where you can write little notes to yourself, and it kind of helps because it's like reading, but you're writing to it. It's engaging you. Hopefully if it's a good read. So my last month, I haven't worked on screen much with that paper that's 3 months old. I've worked more with it as a hard copy. I'll do my edits on the hard copy and I'll pin them in to online or to the Word version and then print off again because it's been close enough to read it. So just a few ideas. Again, we talked a little bit about soliciting input from co-authors and from supervisors and from editors. One of the things I do that's a mistake is people might send me something and they'll say, can you have a look at this? And I'll start putting in little comments about what they should do. And they've invited me in as a co-author, and that's not okay. I should be writing what I think could go in there, and there's a big difference between critiquing it and writing to it. So I have to remind myself of that a lot. And I think what happens sometimes with us as supervisors as well, we can get into a space of critiquing rather than kind of writing with you. And and there'd probably be a whole debate around that, but I don't mind writing with people, but sometimes I forget. And sometimes I just, kind of go, oh, what you should do is, and that's not really okay, because I've got a bit more, I think I've got a bit more to offer than that, and I should. So sometimes just being reminded of that, and they can be awkward conversations, but I think they're good ones to have about what I need is, a bit more about an example of what you're saying or how I could integrate this. What is it you'd put in here? That sort of stuff. I talked about been working from a platform of discontent for a lot of years, and so I think it helps to be dissatisfied. If I was satisfied with my first publication, I'd still be writing like my first publication, and and I always just wanted to get better at the craft. So I am dissatisfied with most stuff that I produce. There's some of it that I read and wish it never ever got inked, and there's some of it I go, oh yeah, it's not too bad, made a mistake here or there, but it's okay, I can live with it. So I am dissatisfied with the drafts as they come through, and I do kind of work from that platform, and I think it's okay, to be dissatisfied with what you do to work through it. Not saying it works for everyone. And the politics. So sometimes when we, like with that table I showed you, and we break up a grant and we publish 5 publications off it, and people start to go, you're sort of milking this one a bit too much. The inverse of that argument, one said to me years ago, it's good use of data. So, and it is my argument. For every qualitative interview we do, it costs about $1,000. By the time it's the person's gone out, done the interview, it's been transcribed, it's been checked, and then you've spent a bit of time on the analysis, it's $1,000. And 1% maybe of that interview will see the light of day in an empirical paper. I think there's an obligation to tell the stories, as many times as you see fit in terms of building your analysis. The other thing is my analysis gets better the more I'm in the data. And so if that means 5 papers for me to be satisfied, I get it, and I've actually got it out, then so be it. So sometimes people will say, 1 paper's enough from a grant and stuff, and I look at all the work that goes into these things, and I just think that it's the same with a master's or a thesis, or your dissertation. It's kind of like there's more than one empirical cut from these things, and there's more to say than one findings paper. So I encourage people to keep working at the data. And with my PhD, we wrote a lot from that, but I saw papers after the fact. So I had my chapters and I could see the 3 papers there, but then I could see some other papers that I did publish, afterwards that never were in the dissertation. So it's just good use of data to mind. We talked a bit about authorship. I love writing with people who like to write, and I like writing with people who are better than me to help me get better. But I also like helping people, learn the craft of it, and that's that hand up, hand down thing that I think is key to writing. And in terms of reciprocity, I don't know whether I should say this or not, but I count a lot. And so if I'm working with someone and it feels like I'm leading the papers and I'm continuing to do the grunt work of it, I'll start to withdraw a little bit and look for other people. So I expect that no one leads all the time, that there's a reciprocity in terms of the heavy lifting of the front first author is shared. And so if I've got a team going, I expect to see some papers coming into me that are nice, solid first drafts that I can work with, and I can work with them as the lead. And I also expect to have to pony up, first authored papers where I'm needing some help to bring these home. So that reciprocity is really interesting, and I think it's really important, not just in terms of sheer numbers of publications, but in terms of the craft and learning the craft. One of the pictures in the second slide of Joan Bator, she used to finish a lot of papers for me. So I'd do the front end, I'd do the methods, I'd do the findings, and I'd get to the discussion and I'd be worn out because my biggest challenge is lifting it up out of the findings into a conceptual place to say, this is what it means for the field. That delicate spot about not repeating your findings and not being so lofty of, I've changed the world with this paper, look at me, so it had to be somewhere in the middle there. And that was the toughest bit of writing for me. And so she used to do a great job of kind of helping me frame those discussions and conclusions. And so for a few years there, she really kind of brought a lot of that work, some finesse that it needed. So again, that's good collaboration. There's good reciprocity. In the years that followed, I was kind of like probably doing the same for her in some way, or definitely doing the same for other people. So, it sort of flows on. Okay, here's a couple of their rules. Joy, Pam, and Joan. One is the 48-hour turnaround. When you get revisions, you must complete the revisions within 48 hours and send them back in. And their logic about this was that, look, the paper's pretty fresh. It's probably been in review for 2 to 3 months. Then you work in with those revisions. And when with revisions, people might have some great ideas, but it might not have anything to do with your paper. So the revisions that people ask you to do, these are peer-reviewed revisions, they're on advisement. So you have to do that piece of defending some of them and taking on some of them, and I've seen people get caught trying to write the paper the reviewers want because they want to get it published, and it usually ends up pretty awkward. You usually end up writing yourself into a corner. So this 48-hour turnaround, what it does is it forces you into a place of going, I read the paper, I know what I wanted to say, I look at their notes about what's not right, what's okay, what needs to be changed, and then I go through and stay true to my original vision for the paper. And often they've got some really good ideas about tightening things up, and I can fix those things pretty quickly. But if it's a rewrite, I can't do it in 48 hours. If it's a total rewrite and they're sending me off on some tangent, and I'm going to take that bite and run with it, there's no way I'll get it done in 48 hours. So that's part of the 48-hour rule, is that you should be able to, even major revisions, you should be able to do them in the 48 hours. Assuming you haven't got anything else on for the next couple of days. But you should really be able to move into that space. Whenever revisions are invited, take them. Take the opportunity to revise that paper, but stick with what you wanted to do with that paper. Stick with the aim of that paper. Don't get taken off base with that. So then, finesse that paper and put it back in. And look, I reckon recently it's been a bit of a trend. We've had 3 or 4 that the revisions have been turned back and we've missed. But for the majority of the 10 years before that, most times your revisions were okay and they'd take it. So sometimes you'll get it pushed back, and the ones that we've missed is when one reviewer's saying something, the other reviewer's saying polar opposite, and the editor won't come in and intervene. And honestly, you're in a cul-de-sac anyway. So you might as well write the paper you want, especially if they've got 2 different ideas and the editor won't rule. It's poor editing, So just to say, so always take the revisions, and I quite like revisions. I think they can really help strengthen papers. We've had a couple that have been so much stronger for the revisions, and a couple that you had to kind of go, well, no, that's not it. But if they're thinking that it's something and it's not, then perhaps you haven't conveyed it right in the first place. So that's one of the rules. There are other rules. This wasn't their rule, this is our rule. We spruik it, So the idea that the papers, when they get published, we don't just put them out there and just pay $3,000 for open access and hope that someone reads them. We really try and spruik them these days. So we've got a Twitter account, and we sort of, we'll say, it's such and such a paper or a major finding. And there was one recent one that was kind of interesting, and Marilee was involved in this one, is a paper about stigma and men's mental health or men's depression and suicide. And we got press here, and I think there was half a dozen radio interviews, and there was 4 or 5 print media, and it just talked to the couple of things that the paper said. And so that paper is getting downloaded quite a bit, and it's still in press, but it's open access, so people can get it. So we should see that paper get cited reasonably well in the next 4 or 5 years. So again, the fact that it's made available and people can access it, I think it makes good sense. People should be able to access the products they kind of pay for, taxpayer money, donor money. And I think, trying to make an impact on the field. And so the Twitter stuff as well has been interesting for us, so that we run the men's health research here, and, there's 1,200 followers, and they pick up on all sorts of things, and we curate some content, but we also create some content. So whenever we have a new paper, we put it out through Twitter and draw people to at least knowing that it's there. So again, that promotion is available to us in the school too. It's Helen or Heather Swallow, yep, and Marilee as well. It's a good person to let know when you've got a paper coming out. We can draw some attention to it, and I think it's great to celebrate them. I think it's just really important, and it sends a good message. And we saw a couple of the MP ones. We've interviewed those guys about their papers and stuff. It's been kind of fun. Oh yeah. And this is the other one from Joy and Pam and Joan. They said every paper has a home, and so my record is 5, I think. I had 5 rejections. It was a good paper, just took a lot of selling, and so when people say they don't get papers rejected, they're lying to you. Just saying. We all get them rejected, and sometimes they're not ready. Sometimes it's bad reviews. Who knows? But it's all just part of it. But to recognise that if the thing is written, it will find a home. So one of mine was a solo one, which got turned back by 5 different journals, and eventually got published, and it's really actually pretty good. It's like it gets cited a fair bit now, so it's you just kind of persevere. And I didn't do major rewrites on it. I kind of had a weird thing going on with it. It was kind of a pulp fiction paper. It was because I'd started with the end at the beginning. Yeah. Anyway, I was experimenting at the time, and anyway, clearly they were right, and I did tidy it up a bit. But just to say, the rejection stuff is okay. It's just you get pretty thick skin in this business, and you just keep writing them until someone's happy enough to ink them, and that you are still happy with your original vision. And I think that gets us to questions. Yeah.
I'm really interested in this idea of code to the paper.
Mm-hmm.
This is a radical new idea.
Yeah.
Because as a doctoral student, that's not what or a master's student, that's not my experience.
Yeah.
So, can you talk about that a little bit more?
Sure. So the question's around coding to the paper. So just to say, when I read through a transcript and I've got a couple of research questions in mind, and I think about those research questions, then I can kind of think about what pieces of the data answer each individual research question. And my idea is that rather than coding for all of the possible papers that you might publish, code for the one that you're going to write first. So if the question is, trying to think of one, just something like how do masculinities intersect with prostate cancer in the pre-treatment phase, then literally I've already cut my data into about a third of the total story because I've probably asked them about the whole trajectory of their illness. And then I'm trying to answer that question in a certain cross-sectional way. And so I'll code that data looking for things that talk to that question. So then I'll chunk that out and then I'll go back in and go, okay, I can see 3 themes here. And that, so the inverse is that you would go through and you would code for everything you're ever going to want from the data. And my experience is you never get really much below, I think 6 is the most we've done empirically off one single grant. And we could have coded for a lot more than that, but it's just in terms of getting into the data and getting the paper written, we just find it more efficient. I don't know, does that answer it?
Yeah, it's just the process of that that's kind of new to me.
Yeah.
Because presumably sometimes there are papers that come out of the data that you don't see before you start.
Correct.
That happens.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I'll read through a couple of transcripts, right? And I'll go, gee, I can see one there. This one I've just written, I can see another 2 that I hadn't even thought about. So, and again, I'd go back in. So this one was 3 themes. It was about injury, interiority and isolation. And then I could see a paper within there, a deeper analysis that would be, I was going to call it 6 degrees of separation. And so, but I could see it, but I hadn't coded for it. But I knew it was there because I'd read a couple of the transcripts. So it's okay to jot down your ideas about where the papers are and table the papers. Doesn't mean you've got to code for them all, And it's probably, in a PhD and Masters, I still think it's okay to answer your questions, your research questions. And so it doesn't mean that you've got to code everything. Like I coded my PhD data in a day because it was just big chunks. It was just big chunks. And I still had to engage with the data to be able to think and analyse and work with it. So it just made it manageable in that respect.
But with that whole process, it starts with a close relationship between the research questions and your table, the papers that you're going to produce.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. So when you write a grant, and it's the same with the proposal, you kind of know where the empirical cuts are going to be. You might even reckon you know the results, but you definitely know where the papers are. So we write those questions literally for papers. Yeah. Yeah.
So you said, for example, you have 1 grant, 5 research questions, you write 5 papers.
Yes.
How do you manage with the method section that it's probably very similar from one paper to another?
Yeah. So So oftentimes you have, for example, a data set that might be 40 interviews. And there might be something about that data set that you can siphon off that might be, look, there might be 20 men and there might be 20 women. You go, I'm just gonna look at the guys' data and write one around that. So my method section is going to be different in terms of sample, but it's also going to be different in terms of I might be looking at a process. So I might apply a bit of a grounded theory lens to it. Might be looking at change over time and process. I might then go and look at the women's data, and then I might go, oh, I've got a cross-sectional question. I've got a question at a point in time about the 3 factors that influence this. And then my methods is probably going to be more like an interpretive description or an ethnographic. So my methods do change. So it's not to cut and paste them, but it usually aligns with the sample. And there was another one that we did on that list that was place. And it was about place and in the context of place and men's depression. And the methods were quite different because the theoretical lens was all about this idea of place and space. So how you engaged the data, even from the theory point of view, but also from how you engaged in the quotes and the ones that would show space and place, was quite different. So again, they're tweaks, and when they're in different journals as well, if it's a 4,000 word journal versus an 8,000 word article, your method section halves. So, so a lot of stuff gets left out, and I always leave a few things out of methods because it distracts reviewers. Because reviewers will always say, oh, could you put in more detail about, recruitment? Could you say more about, when this data was collected? So I leave those things out because it helps them feel helpful and takes them off the other stuff. I shouldn't be saying this, should I? You've probably been reviewing my papers.
I've got a question from online, and it's from Lillian Hahn. She just asked about tips on doing analysis and writing with a team of people.
Yeah, very good. So a couple of ways. Way back in the day, we wrote a really nice paper with Joy Johnson, and what she did was write the first theme. She got a code. She wrote the first theme, and she sent that theme out to 2 other people along with their chunk of data. And she sent us, 40 or 50 pages of data for our themes, because we'd kind of agreed on the themes. We talked about it and sort of knew things. So she's written hers up. Really nice job she did. And then I think it was 3 of us. 3 of us got this wad of data, and then we wrote our sections up. And then she brought it back together, finessed it so it sounded like the one voice. And we sat down and we talked about the data, and we chose illustrative quotes and kind of worked it out. But it was a fascinating process. So that's one way to work in a team, where you bring them in, bring your co-authors in at the data analysis and write-up level. And then there's others where it's a little bit like what I've just done. I've sent it out at a point where it's kind of written, but they've all had access to a transcript and coded it, so they have a sense of the data, and so that one's a little bit less time consuming for people, but it still brings them into the analysis, because the analysis is still iterative because you're still writing it up. So it's got to get tightened. So there's lots of different ways of doing it. I think what's important is to be very, very clear with people about your expectations of what you're wanting from them, because if you're leading the paper, and you're inviting someone in, you just got to be clear with them about what kind of commitment they're making, because it might alter their availability to be on the paper. Or they might say to you, I'll say to people sometimes, I go, I'm happy to be on it, but I can only spend a half day on it, and feed back to you, So, and that might not be what they want. They might want something more than that, and that's okay. You forgo that opportunity because you're juggling a few papers.
Well, we're at 1 o'clock.
Excellent.
So if we don't have any other questions, it's like we're clear on the online front as well. And I'd just like to extend our thanks to you, Don, for sharing your insights to this process.
Great. And good luck with everything.